Good morning. I was talking with the pastor and switched sermons on you guys. And it went from losing to win to what was I thinking? And I enjoyed your piano playing, Diane. God is good in so many ways in giving gifts. I'd just like to ask the Lord to be with us this morning. Lord, you promised to lead and guide us, that your Spirit would guide us in the truth, and I ask for that blessing this morning. And I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. What was I thinking? Have you noticed a mental health crisis in our world? It was bad before COVID. It's a lot worse now. And just listening to praise and prayer, you guys are going through a lot. There are all kinds of challenges. And I want to be dealing with that. I kind of wish we had a picture in a picture or something so I could see some of this stuff. I want to tell you a little bit about my ministry. God seemed to direct me into a ministry of turning around churches. I landed in a large church as an associate, but there was no senior pastor. There's supposed to be a senior pastor. It was a very challenging church, and eventually they got one in there, but it was a good learning experience. Many times God's preparing you for what's about to happen, which is a scary thought when I hear the pain that's going on in here already. And from there, I went to a district with a couple of small churches way down in southern Louisiana. I had multiple cities of like 50 to 100,000 people in my district that didn't even have an Adventist church in them. 7 very large parishes or counties in southern Louisiana. And the churches that I went into, the district I went into, the previous 5 pastors had all left ministry from that district. I think only 2 of them to retirement. And I came in there, and they were damaged churches. I was a brand new pastor, and the Lord just started working, and we built a brand new church in one of them. And 3 years later, when I left that church district, we had higher attendance on Sabbath than we had membership across the district. Boy, would I love to see that come back after COVID. But from there, I went to a church that was known as a very cold, conservative church. When I was interviewing, here's what one of the members, one of the elders told me about their church. That it was so cold in this church, you could ice skate down the center aisle. That's an elder telling me about their church. I interviewed with it in that church, and it was the most hostile interview I've ever had. They went after me, and I decided after a little bit I was just going to come back at them. And I ended up being the pastor. And when I accepted the invitation, I mean, they'd voted and they said I could have it, and it took me a couple of days to decide if I wanted it. It was a larger church. It had 360 some members. I told the conference president when I accepted it, there probably won't be a honeymoon. It'll be more like a buzzsaw. And that was accurate. In the first year, we went from 360 down to 330. Lost a third of the elders. It was rough. There were times I wondered, why in the world did I come here? And from 330, it went to 580. But you have to know, it wasn't all about what I was doing. It's about what God was doing. We had an awesome greeter. Oh man, what goes on in that lobby is important, folks. And he and his wife loved people, and they invited him to their home. They had an awesome greeter in a cold church. They needed to warm up the church. At least now they had a warm greeter and a warm pastor. Stood up to some of the challenges and lost some of the problems. But God did something else. I can remember sitting out in the parking lot late one night. I was supposed to be on vacation, but my car blew its engine. I was waiting for the engine to be rebuilt before I could go on vacation. And I was sitting out in the parking lot, 10 o'clock or so at night, praying. You see, when I'd accepted the call to this church, they said they'd already bought 5 acres for a new church, and they were committed to building a new church, and that was a part of why I accepted it. What I didn't know is they were divided right down the middle on whether or not they should move or not. They were currently in a church that looked a lot older than it was, on a half acre of land. Remember I told you 360 members when I got there? With about 20 parking spots. We parked all over the neighbor's property. It was along a 4-lane highway. They had no parking signs all along the highway to make sure we didn't park along there. We had to park in a shopping plaza down the road. It was kind of a mess. And I remember sitting out there that night saying, Lord, you're into it. I now know we're into this. Problems. What do you want? Do you want us to try and get the neighbor's place and just settle in here? We've got to do something. What do you want? You've got to show me what to do. I went inside the church, a little back door into my office, and I walked around the organ bench and through the sanctuary without turning on a light. I knew my way around, went back in the foyer, got something, came back through and around and out the door, and got home probably 11 o'clock at night or so. Went to bed, and around 1 in the morning, my telephone rang. Hello? You the pastor of the Adventist church? Yes? Your church is on fire. Click. I'm sitting there thinking, sitting on the edge of the bed thinking, was that a practical joke or real? And my telephone rang. Picked it up. Hello? Said, Elder, I just got a call from the police. They said our church is on fire. I said, yeah, it probably is. I don't know why I said it that way, but that's what I said. A second call in a row, yeah, this probably isn't a joke. Hung up the phone, put on some regular pastor work clothes, not work clothes. My wife said, well, why are you getting dressed up? I said, because if it's a real fire, I'm not going to be home for a long time. And I headed towards the church. It's 5 miles from my house. You wouldn't believe what I'm praying on the way to the church. Lord, either make it a really small fire or a really big one. Please, nothing in between. Because if it's a little fire, we can use it to update the church and just keep going. If it's a really big fire, well, that finishes it. We got to build a new church. If it's a middle-sized fire, oh, that's a nasty rebuilding program or whatever. Please, really small or really big. interesting prayer life at different times. As I got closer, I could see the glow on the horizon. I got about a block or two away, and the 4-lane highway shut down. And I can see like spaghetti hoses, the fire hoses, stretching down the highway. I mean, they're draining the water system from all around. I parked my car along the road and started walking, ducked under tape into the area where they're fighting the fire, just about the time the fire broke through the roof in the back. I can remember watching them bring an aerial water cannon around to shoot into the attic area that was really where it was hot fire. And I thought, if they stop the fire right there, we've got a really nasty mid-sized fire. I said, Lord, please cause that fireman problems. All of a sudden, his water cannon quit. And he brought it down. I mean, they lowered this big aerial water cannon down, and they started working on it. I said, Lord, more trouble, please. And there was something that a bolt wouldn't come loose, and they had to get their power hacksaw off and cut it off. And they're rebuilding this thing right on the spot. And all of a sudden, everything started working for him on the ground. I said, Lord, come on, please. And it's just fine. It swings back up. And just as he goes back up, all the air horns go off all the way on the fire trucks around the building. I didn't know what that meant at the moment, but later I was going to learn that meant that they gave up on the building. It was a warning to get everybody out and to save all their equipment they could and just keep the neighbor's building from burning down. Once they're to the point of no return, no saving the building, God said they can fix it now. And the church was a total loss. We had a giant for sale sign out front, but nobody would buy. Do you ever heard of anything called photojournalism? Great big picture on the front page of the newspaper. Church burning in the background with a for sale sign in front. People were asking me, don't want to offend you, but how much did it cost you to have somebody burn your church down for you? You just did an offensive maneuver there. One of the businessmen in town did that to me. And it was wondering if it was earnest in this fire. And I learned in a hurry that the media will set people up to twist their stories and their words. Because I made sure the media didn't know who I was for a while till I knew the story they wanted. So I wouldn't give them the information that they could twist. It's very interesting to watch this stuff going down. Sometime shortly after sunrise, the building is now reduced to twisted steel, broken up concrete and bricks, and a lot of ashes. I mean, there was a pile of ashes this deep on the center line of the 4-lane highway as the water flowed out of the front door and down the street. Just left like sandbars of charcoal and ash. It was a total loss. And the leader of the opposition to moving, older man, walked up. He said, you know, I was the chairman of the building committee when we built this church. He said, I bought a semi to haul all the rock and the brick in this building. He said, know anybody in the market for some used bricks? He looked at me and he said, young man, I was in my 30s. He said, young man, make sure it's a good, strong building committee. And he turned and he walked away. The church was now united completely behind a building program. The next day, well, they were doing an arson investigation. The next day, they allowed us to go into the building after they finished it. They had determined it to be an arson fire, And I would be questioned for hours by investigators to decide if I was an arsonist. And during the fire, they'd actually asked me if I had ever said anything to the effect that a fire wouldn't hurt us. And I looked at the fire marshal that was standing there watching the building burn, and I said, yes, I have. Boy, I didn't want to say that. He said, what did you say and who did you say it to? And all of a sudden, I had a repressed memory problem. I could remember I had said something, but I couldn't remember who I said or what I said. It took me weeks to get that memory back. When I did, it gave them somebody to go check into, somebody who'd threatened us. And I said, go ahead, make our day. See the for sale sign out front? They'd threaten to burn or destroy our building if I didn't cooperate with them. By the way, when you're playing hardball with Satan's side, they'll play hardball back. It's kind of an adventure. And anyway, so when we went in, there was a tarp over the organ bench, which is right by my pastor's office door. And as they pulled the tarp off, it was buried under ashes. There is no roof. It's just wide open sky. It's just concrete walls around the edge. And as they pull that off, on the bench is a paper bag, about like this. But it's been underneath a fireproof tarp. Because they threw a tarp over it, a fireman said, we think we saved your organ. I said, but I watched the roof fall through the pipe chamber. They saved the console. The pipes were gone. But as they pulled it off, there was this bag, and I reached over and I picked up the bag and I looked inside of it. And I knew instantly that nobody could know the contents of that bag. I can tell you now. There was a pack of Marlboro cigarettes. There was a tape player, cassette tape player. And the cassette tape, Guns N' Roses album is Death and Destruction. There's some partially eaten pizza. And I can see without dusting fingerprints with oily fingers as somebody has reached around on the tape player. And there's a West Virginia fishing map. This was in Maryland. I set it back down and I turned to the fireman beside me. I said, call your fire marshal back. I said, I just found some belongings of the arsonist. And nobody but the fire marshal and I knew it was in that bag. And if anybody knew, we were going to ask, how do you know that? It was kind of difficult for him because, and it was for me too, I'm one of the suspects. And I have my fingerprints on that bag, but not in it. You couldn't have paid me to reach inside that bag. So they now had fingerprints of an arsonist, but they didn't have an arsonist. And there was a man who walked up to me that day and threatened me, my family, and my church. With the burning building right there behind, smoking building still smoking behind me. What was he up to? Well, he'd been abusing his wife, and I'd helped his wife and kids escape. By the way, that was a great investment. 11-year-old boy is a pastor today. But anyway, just before our groundbreaking, probably close to a year later, we've been renting facilities, and I get a phone call on Tuesday, and I said, we arrested the arsonist last night. This is Tuesday, groundbreaking's on Sunday. And it's stirring up the community, wondering, did we burn this to get insurance money? God's timing is so excellent. And he said, I want you to show up at a press conference. We're going to tell everybody Wednesday morning. He said, you can't tell anybody between now and then. I said, okay, I'll be there Wednesday. Tuesday night, we had prayer meeting. I said, I can't tell you why, but you really want to be watching the news tomorrow. Well, what's up? I can't tell you why. Be watching the news tomorrow. I went to the news conference, and he went through the evidence that they had and the arrest. And I'd gotten to know this goofy guy, and he was goofy, fire marshal. And he answered a few questions, and he's tired of it. He says, by the way, here's Pastor Roosenberg. If you have any more questions, ask him. He does an about face. There is a door, and he's gone. He just handed the news conference off to me with the television, the newspapers, and all the rest of it, without telling me that's what he was going to do. Okay, so I started talking to him and answering questions. And the story goes like this in the press that afternoon, that night, and the next day. Arsonist arrested, groundbreaking on Sunday. Totally clearing our name in our community. During the 3-day trial later, they have this neat thing. If you're a witness, you cannot be in the courtroom to hear other witnesses. So you spend days in the hallway with the other witnesses. And so the arresting officer and I got to know each other quite well in the hallway. And he tells me the story. The story simply was, he's driving at 1 o'clock at night on a 4-lane one-way street near Washington, D.C. And there's a moped going the wrong way on a 4-lane one-way street. And, he stops the guy, not intending to give him a ticket or anything, but to tell him this is not a good idea. And he does an ID check. And he says, can I see your driver's license? And the young man, his name is Eric Parsons, hands him his wallet. Not his driver's license. Hands him his whole wallet. Officer carefully opens it to check for a driver's license. This is not how officers want you to do it. But in this case, it was interesting. He looks through, and he sees lots of pictures of little boys with no clothes on. He said, who are these kids? Oh, those are my boys. Problem of it is, Eric is a Caucasian young man in his 20s, and the boys are little black boys. They're your boys. Yeah, those are my boys. He finds a driver's license, and he says, Eric, you're not under arrest, but I'm just wondering if you'd be willing to come down to the station and talk to me. And he says, let's just throw your moped in the trunk of my car. You hop in the front seat with me. You're not in trouble. I just want to talk to you for a while. Okay. So they together put the moped in the trunk, and Eric hops in the front seat with the officer, and the officer starts driving. He says, Eric, what's your favorite station? Oh, he likes a hard rock station. He dials into the hard rock station. What's your favorite group? Guns N' Roses. What's your favorite album? Death and Destruction, but I lost it in a church fire up in Hagerstown. Oh, you did? Tell me about it. So he did. And our arsonist was arrested, and it matched the fingerprints that we had. Timing, Monday night, he's arrested. Wednesday, the news conference. Sunday, our name is cleared in our whole community. And our church it was already had turned around, but now it just takes off. And it is now a loving, conservative church that people of all stripes can walk in and be loved. It was amazing to watch what God did. So, I had been going through turnaround churches. And from there, I was asked to go to another church, a church of just under 1,000 members that had been fighting with itself for about 30 years. Great gifts, especially in music. You had a country and western group, you had a traditional worship group, and you had a contemporary worship group. And at the moment, contemporary was in charge, had the more votes. When I accepted the call, there were 3. By the time I got there a month or so later, there were 2. Country and western split off and started what they called the cowboy church. That left traditional and contemporary, the 2 that were really fighting. The traditional group, we had an academy campus there as well. The traditional group wanted the academy students to be involved with their programming and to do as they were told and don't ask questions. The contemporary group wanted to entertain the young people. I had a different viewpoint. How about we train and involve them? Listen to them and work together with them. That made a lot more sense to me. That didn't match either one of the other 2. There were good points on both. Several years after I left that church, the leader of the traditional group called me up and said, "Now that you've been gone a few years, will you tell me which side you were on?" I consider that a victory phone call. He still couldn't have figured it out. I said, "Really, I wasn't, because you both had good and you both had bad in the way you were doing things." But, we were having challenges. And we got to September. A showdown business meeting. We had traditional, we had contemporary, and we had academy. And the leadership of the academy was going with contemporary. And it was a tough meeting. I told the conference what was coming and how that the contemporary group was using the academy staff to try and manipulate the students. And they were using students as pawns to get what they wanted. They wouldn't believe me. I had them come and chair the meeting because it was going to be that kind of volatility in the largest church in the conference. And it did not go well. The conference found out that everything I'd been telling them was probably true as it fell apart in their laps that night. Let's go back to the screen. That is on the 10th. The next morning, my wife and I are out walking and praying and talking. What do we do now? As we walk back towards our house and we're walking across our yard, my daughter runs out. We're out in the country. Something terrible is happening. September 11, 2001. My church fell apart on the 10th. My country fell apart on the 11th. I headed for the academy. I was with them as the buildings fell, with the students. From there, that evening, I headed out to a television station called Safe TV. And we had a program called America Talks. We had a couple of state senators, some psychologists, some pastor types. I was a part of this. And we had a discussion as people called in on the night of September 11. It was intense emotion. As I said, my church was challenged. My nation has been challenged. But we should have good news. We had evangelism coming on. You should have wonderful evangelism right about this point. But my church in its crisis said we shouldn't take advantage of people's emotions while they're asking questions. I said, what? You don't want to give them answers while they're asking questions? We should not have this evangelistic series. I said, too bad. Advertising's already in the mail. We're stuck. We've got to do it. My church was in such bad shape. We got one couple, 2 guests. And out of a 1,000-member church, we got about 20 people to show up. You know, Desert Storm, I was doing a meeting just as that happened. And we were slammed with over 100 guests. This one, a bigger event, God says, no, I'm not letting anybody show up in this mess. And he held them back. Let's see. My church is in trouble. My nation is in trouble. Evangelism falls flat. And so did I. I found myself sitting at home, unable to do anything. I knew what was happening. I was spinning into depression, and I was going into it hard and fast. And I called a guy at John Brown University. He didn't answer his phone. He's the head of the counseling department at John Brown University. He's on America Talks with me. I know the guy. And I left a message. I said, I know the signs of depression. I'm spinning out hard and I'm spinning out fast, and I should probably talk, and sooner would be a lot better than later. And I hung up. About 7:30 that night, I get a phone call. He's calling me back. It's amazing to get personal phone calls from a counselor after hours. He said, where are you? I said, I'm sitting at home. He said, how long would it take you to get here? I said, about 15, 20 minutes. He says, I'm waiting. Come now. And I came. And during that first night, he asked me a question. I ended up going to talk to him 3 times. One probably would have done the job, because he asked me this question: what are you trying to do that only God can do? Man, when he asked me that question, I knew I had been trying so hard to hold this church together. I'd been giving it everything I had, and I failed. But whose church is it? Is it my church? Nope. It's God's church. I said, okay, Lord, it's all yours. I can't do anything anyway. I've learned that lesson. You see, God enabled me to do other things in other churches, but this time it's a different route. Okay, Lord. A couple of weeks later, middle of the night, my phone rings. You guessed it. It's another fire. This time it's the academy, the cafeteria. and it burned to the ground. As I walked out on the campus, you have all these people standing at a distance because it is a really hot fire. And you have the traditional group, you have the country and western group, you have the contemporary group. They're all out there watching them. Most of them are alumni of this academy, or they have kids there. And you have all the students outside as they're watching this thing burn. And I'm thinking ahead. A couple hours, they've got to feed a couple hundred students. And they don't have a cafeteria. That food is well burned. And I walked up to the principal who had been leading part of the contemporary opposition group. And I said, I know you've got your hands full. I said, I just want you to know I've got breakfast for everybody. He said, thank you. I walked over to the head of, not the head, but a behind-the-scenes, very ornery lady that was behind the traditional group. And she could be feisty. And she's standing out there in the yard watching this fire. And I walked up to her and I said, I just volunteered for breakfast for all these kids. I need help. Are you in? She said, okay. I said, let's head to Walmart. And we went to Walmart down the road and we went shopping in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it was 24 hours Walmart. And we load up a bunch of carts and we come back to our cafeteria. We have a youth center with a commercial kitchen in it at the church across the street from the academy. And she gets some of her friends from the traditional group, and we serve breakfast. I told the principal, I said, we got breakfast, but the rest of it's on you. You've got a staff to figure it out after this, but you can use our kitchen. They sent the kids home for a break that wasn't supposed to be then. They just called it a break. And when they came back, they were operating out of our kitchen. And the kids were walking past the church, across the road, past the church, into our cafeteria, back and forth, every day. And I'm praying. They had decided that on the weekend of October 20, they would start their own services. And the contemporary and the academy would break off from the church. And that date is coming on closer and closer. I got a phone call. It's the chaplain of the academy. Can I come talk to you? Sure, come on over. She walks across the street, comes into my office. She says, I need you to pray for me. I said, what's wrong? She says, I'm going to get fired today. I said, why? I mean, this was she's a good academy chaplain. All right? She says, because I'm about to walk into the principal's office and tell him I will have no part in breaking up this church and operating the services. This is less than a week from their first Sabbath. I said, what's up? She said, I just came out of a meeting with the 4 class pastors and the SA pastor, and they're unanimous. They don't want to divide from the church, and I won't make them do it. Oh, okay. We prayed. She walked across the street to tell the principal her decisions and that she would be fired. She came back a few minutes later with a smile on her face. I said, what happened? She said, I didn't get fired. I said, I told him I wouldn't have any part of it and that we won't do this. And he said, whatever. He's so overwhelmed with all the insurance stuff, he has no fight left in him. Okay, thank you, Lord. The contemporary group, there was a couple of people in there that were furious if you ever mentioned Ellen White. And I talked to the chaplain. I said, hey, the young man that you have preaching, do you think he'll team preach with me on the 20th? See, I knew his testimony. And so we team preached, and part of it was I interviewed him on his testimony. which was he was sitting in history class with his history book opened, but he was hiding other reading material. You've heard of kids hiding stuff in their books, right? He had this little thin booklet in there called Steps to Christ. That's not what kids are usually sneaking for their reading material in history class. But he's reading Steps to Christ in history class. And he gets to a page where you can sign and date to surrender your life to Jesus. And he decides that he's going to give his life to Jesus Christ. And he signs and he dates it in his history class. And we talked about that day. It was so much fun. But God wasn't done. By the time we got to December, I took a group of 8 caving. I'm an approved guide for a wild cave called Fitton Cave. It's got 18 miles of passages. It's a lock cave on the Buffalo River National Park territory. And it's a place that if you don't come out when you say you are going to come out, they send a rescue team after you. And it's a couple miles from the nearest road. But I'm an approved guide, I've been in there lots of times, but this caving trip went really bad. We got caught in a flash flood on our way from the cave back to the vehicles. In December, it would be snow and rain mix before the night was over, and we're waiting in deep water, and we never were able to get back to our car. I had left an Atrolian traverse, which is a rope tied between trees 8 feet above the water of this one stream we had to cross. By the time we got to my rope, it was gone. It was underwater. You couldn't cross. I was to find out later. They sent out 3 teams to find us the next day when they finally realized we were missing. One team, one man, to go check a cabin to see if we could have gotten to it. The other 2 teams were sent out looking for our bodies. Because if we got in the stream, they knew we were dead. We attempted many times to find a crossing on that stream, but I never would do it because I knew we would die. I'd eventually found and broken into a historic cabin, which is where the one guy found us. It was brutal. It took me 7 hours to stop shaking after rescue. I had one guy going in and out of consciousness with hypothermia when we were found. It was rough. It took me 5 days before I could get my car back, the water low enough to get it out of where it was parked. But while I was waiting for my car to get back so I could go on vacation, I went shopping with my wife and my daughters. Hey guys, do you like going shopping with your wife and your daughters, clothing shopping? One of the lowest things on my to-do list, on my desire to-do list. Okay, would that be true, Karen? Yes. And I found myself in a J.C. Penney store watching my daughters. They were with me on that caving trip. My 10-year-old son was with me. They were 3 of the 8 in my group. I found myself in a J.C. Penney watching them try on clothes, grinning ear to ear, because I was watching my living daughters trying on clothes. Go back to that. This whole thing broke loose in December. And by September, December, I realized the depression was gone as I watched my living daughters. The things God took me through to hang on to me. I can't say that it felt good. Okay? I know that you're all going through challenges too, and I know it doesn't feel good. But I know that if you will let him have control, if you are going down, ask yourself the question, what are you trying to do that only God can do? And you need to give that to him. And he will pull it together. It may not be as you expect. And I can not tell you that everything's going to go all wonderful from there on. Because in just 3 years after that, 3.5 years, one of those living daughters died in my wife in my arms. But we didn't go into depression that time. I guess we'd learned our lesson to give it to God and let him take care of it. The challenges are still there. But you know what? God can get you through. What are you facing? Relationship fears? Financial fears? Health fears? Work fears? Time of trouble fears? You can have a whole cup full of trouble. What are you trying to hang on to that only God can take care of? You need to let go and let him have it, or it will take you down. 1 John, love has been perfected among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. If someone says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. We need to be loving and fearless. If you're facing fear because of what's coming, you need to focus on Jesus more. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. It's not your church, it's not your life, it's not your finances, it's not your job, it's his. If you've given it to Jesus, it's his. Let him take care of it. You'll be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. If you're trying to be loved by everybody, get over it. If you're afraid of being laughed at, get over it. You're going to be hated for Jesus. In a world like this, oh yeah, it's going bad fast, isn't it? Don't expect that everybody's going to love you if you stand up for Jesus Christ and truth. But he will be with you. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. Don't give up. Keep meeting together, fellowshipping, hold each other up. One day you might be holding somebody, they might be holding you tomorrow. You need a fellowship. Love each other for Jesus Christ. Jesus is coming again. And I'm going to turn it over to you for a closing song. I don't know come on up. I don't know what challenges you're facing individually, my brothers and sisters. But as we sing, let them go. Let God have them. You can't do it, but he can. What my counselor asked me is a question I want to keep you thinking of. What are you trying to do that only God can do? What was I thinking that I could do it myself? It can only get you in trouble.
Please open your hymnals to 338,